Today is March 3rd, 2025, and I want to speak to you today about the brutal invasion and occupation of a democratic country by an authoritarian country. Of course, I'm speaking about the invasion of the Western Sahara by Morocco. So let me share a map so we can all see what I'm referring to. So this, of course, is Africa. You see here in the northwestern corner of Africa, we have Morocco, and then we have the Western Sahara, or more properly known as the Sahrawi Republic. You see here the internationally recognized border, which has been violated by Morocco for decades now, although there's indications that Morocco may be gearing up for additional aggression, as we will talk about in a bit. So let's blow up a little bit here, this map of Africa. Again, you can see Morocco here and the Western Sahara, and here along the border with Mauritania and Algeria are the refugee camps. Most of the population of Western Sahara has been forced into refugee camps where they've been living now for decades. So most of Western Sahara population has been ethnically cleansed, forced out of their country. Now, don't take my word for this if you're not familiar with it. The United Nations has repeatedly condemned the illegal invasion of the Western Sahara by Morocco. So here from the 1970s, there's a 1979 resolution from the General Assembly condemning the invasion of the Western Sahara. Again, the United Nations reaffirms the inalienable right of the people of Sahara to self-determination and independence. But Morocco doesn't abide by that. Here again, another UN document. Here's an actual map. It's again from the UnitedNations.org. You see the internationally recognized boundary. Now, this line that goes down through most of the country is actually the ceasefire line. There was a ceasefire in 1991. So Morocco continues to illegally occupy all of the territory to the northwest of this line, and the territory controlled by the actual people and government of the Sahrawi Republic is to the right of that line. Though it's mostly desert, it's very sparsely populated. In fact, what little population was left has been chased out by Morocco. But again, this is the United Nations describing the illegal occupation of Western Sahara. Again, 2023, this has been condemned by the United Nations over and over again. As recently as December 2023, again, on the question of Western Sahara, the United Nations reaffirmed independence of the people of Western Sahara. And if you don't accept the United Nations, the European Court of Justice has said the same thing. As recently as October 2024, the Sahrawi government sued some of the European members in the European Court of Justice because the European countries were cooperating in the illegal invasion of their country by Morocco. And the European Court of Justice ruled definitively that this violated the right of self-determination of the Sahrawi people, that the Sahrawi Republic is illegally occupied by Morocco. And again, you see here the ruling of the court. They said that this occupation was illegal without the consent of the Sahrawi people, and Morocco has no authority to occupy Western Sahara. Again, the Court of Justice of the European Union reiterated the importance of respecting international law and the principle of self-determination. So there you have it. The United Nations, the European Court of Justice have definitively ruled that this occupation is illegal. Well, what about the Sahrawi Republic? The full name is the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, but for short, simply known as Sahrawi Republic. Their motto, the country's motto, is freedom, democracy, unity. Obviously, very radical idea. So we see here the UN considers the Polisario Front. Now, the Polisario Front is the ruling party. We'll see about their elections. UN considers this the legitimate representative of the Sahrawi people. And again, UN recognizes the right of independence. The 1999 Constitution of the Sahrawi Republic is similar to parliamentary constitutions in many European states. Again, they have an elected president. The president is elected by the Congress. The Congress is elected by popular vote. So we see here the General Popular Congress is elected by people voting in the refugee camps. Again, the vast majority of the population has been forced into refugee camps. In these camps, there are 11-person cells, the smallest unit of political structure. So indeed, the Western Sahara, the Sahrawi Republic, is actually more democratic than the United States. And again, the leader of the country, the president, is indirectly elected by the popular Congress, similar to the United States, where the president is indirectly elected by the electoral college, at least theoretically. So again, elected government. This is the current president, Brahim Ghali. We'll see he has been elected a couple of times. He was reelected in January 2023, obtaining 1,253 votes, and the next applicant was the 563. So again, there is an election, a democratic election for the government of Western Sahara. What about Morocco? Morocco is ruled by this person, Mohammed VI. He styles himself king, a multi-billionaire. Again, according to reports, there is a lot of corruption. The king appoints the prime minister. King has a lot of power. The king has total control over the military, the judiciary, foreign policy, and has basically total control over who is the prime minister and so forth. Here we see criticizing the king is punishable with prison. And we'll talk about some examples of that. So this is the gentleman who rules Morocco currently. And we'll see in 2020, the Trump administration ostensibly recognized Morocco's control over Western Sahara, and that's been followed by the Biden administration. The ruler, of course, again, a very rich person, Mohammed. He's a major landowner and a major business owner. What are some of the things Mohammed has done? Well, in 2013, Mohammed pardoned a pedophile, Daniel Galvin, who was convicted of raping children as young as 4 years old. So it's a crime to criticize the king, but if you're a child rapist, you get off. Again, allegations of corruption. The U.S. Embassy reports that corruption is prevalent at all levels of Moroccan society, run by Mohammed VI. So here we have it, a autocratic government, authoritarian government invading its smaller democratic neighbor. And what does the Biden administration think about this? Well, here is Joe Biden giving a speech a couple of years ago in Poland, talking about standing up for the right of people to live naked. Goes on to say, we're going to support and stand up for democracy, says Joe Biden. And again, we will keep standing up for these same things. Of course, that doesn't apply to Western Sahara somehow. Here's Biden's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, telling us again last year at a conference, telling us that we will stand up for the principles of democracy and human rights. Again, obviously that doesn't apply to Western Sahara. So let's talk a little bit about the background. What is the history of this? So The Turks, for many years in the Middle Ages and the early modern period, were able to occupy North Africa, but the Almoravid dynasty and essentially what is today Morocco was able to maintain their independence. And again, this dynasty, this Almoravid dynasty, we see was important. And here is the dynasty overlaid over the current map of Africa and Spain and Portugal. So you see where this dynasty was. So again, much of this was reduced in the modern age. And then this is the gentleman who actually invaded in the 1970s. And to go back, in the 19th century, Morocco fought a series of wars against Spain and against France. And in the early 19th century, France made Morocco a protectorate, and Morocco came under the control of France for several decades, and Morocco eventually gained its independence in the 1950s, in the mid-1950s. And again, this was the ruler of Morocco before the current ruler, Mohammed. This was a person styled Hassan II. Hassan II, very interestingly, held slaves. One of the interesting things is Morocco was one of the latest or last countries in the world to allow legalized slavery. So again, Hassan's reign was infamous for its appalling human rights record. Hassan imprisoned his political opponents, even executing people or kidnapping them in Paris and in other countries. And when Mauritania received its independence, Morocco refused to recognize Mauritania as independent, claiming the entirety of Mauritanian territory. That is, Morocco claimed they owned Mauritania. Mauritania should not be independent. And then in 1963, there was a war between Algeria and Morocco because Algeria was claiming that a good chunk of Algeria really belonged to Morocco. So when Algeria gained its independence from France, Morocco invaded. And again, this idea of slavery. So here we see, for instance, as late as 1907, here was a story from Le Petit Parisien talking about the slave trade in Morocco. Indeed, the French government ultimately formally abolished slavery when it took over in the 1920s. So apparently in 1923, the French authorities insisted that Morocco end slavery, but slavery continued to persist into the 20th century. Indeed, remarkably, house slaves were common in Morocco in the 1930s. Even as late as the 1950s, there were still slaves. And indeed, again, when Morocco won its independence in 1956, there were still slaves in the royal household. There was still a royal harem. Indeed, Hassan II, the man who invaded Western Sahara, owned slaves. He even owned sex slaves. So the royal harem was not dissolved until 1999. So literally, this is the gentleman who invaded. He was a slave owner. He owned sex slaves and other slaves as part of the royal household. So again, we mentioned the Sand War. So here you have some of the details. 1963, Moroccan forces occupied some border towns. So Morocco invaded. In fact, they invaded based on something called Greater Morocco. What is Greater Morocco? Well, that's interesting. So here is Greater Morocco. You see, Morocco was claiming not only Western Sahara, but all of Mauritania, a good chunk of Algeria, a good chunk of Mali, and it turns out a good chunk of Spain to boot, although it's not really listed on this map. But again, we'll come back to that in a minute. So again, a Greater Morocco is based upon this idea of the Almoravid dynasty. Morocco wants to reestablish it. Again, it can't be much clearer. So in the Sand War, they invaded, but Morocco was defeated by Algeria. They were forced to get out and had to retreat. So again, we see here details of how the Moroccans tried to seize territory, but were ultimately thrown out. So that was in the 1960s. Then the 1970s, of course, this quest for Greater Morocco went into the Western Sahara. When the Western Sahara gained its independence from Spain in 1975, Morocco invaded. And there was an active war from 1975 to 1991. Again, there was a ceasefire along the ceasefire line that we talked about. Again, it's amazing, this small force of Western Saharans had a very small population. They only had a population of about 60,000, and yet they were able to actually retain a sliver of independence, despite being invaded by their much larger neighbor. So you see here in this picture some of the arms of the Sahrawi troops. So there was a 91 ceasefire, but even since then, there have been problems. So again, almost all of the population of the Sahrawi Republic was displaced and forced to go into refugee camps, where they are to this day. Again, we mentioned 2020, Donald Trump tried to recognize the authority of Morocco over Western Sahara, and that's been followed by the Biden administration. So again, we have the ceasefire line. However, there have been continued problems with the persecution of the native population. So here again, we see the ethnic cleansing and the disposal of the native population. So again, here's the population of Western Sahara. In 1975, the population was just 68,000. Again, it's a desert country, sparsely populated. But then the natives were chased out. There's a migration, 75 to 18,000 people left. The native population was chased out into refugee camps, and the new population was brought in by the Moroccans. And then now you see the population growing. To this day, there are over 600,000, almost entirely Moroccans now. And again, you see this in the Moroccan population. So again, here's the Moroccan population. You see Morocco has had a lot of people leaving the country over the years. Now, some of that is people want to get out of there for different reasons. Some of them have gone to the European Union. But again, you see here the large number of people leaving Morocco, and a good chunk of these were people who actually were encouraged to go to West Sahara. So the Sahrawi people have been chased out of their own country into refugee camps and occupied by a different group of people, often called ethnic cleansing. And of course, this is a serious issue. Now, we mentioned already about this group, Reporters Without Borders, and this is their report speaking about how terrible the situation is. So you see here the government of Morocco has serious problems with freedom of speech, freedom of the press. So here we see that Morocco in 2020, they issued a 4-year respecting the king. He criticized the king. What a country. You go to jail for 4 years for criticizing the leaders. Again, here's another human rights activist was convicted of insulting regulatory bodies. It was insulting the government. Another one, Jamil Sadan, was arrested for criticizing the government. Yet again, another instance of a person for criticizing the government. Blogger sentenced to 3 years in prison for insulting public officials. So this is what goes for freedom of the press and freedom of speech in Morocco. And again, here's another report on Morocco, Western Sahara, silence reporters. Again, you see some of this. You have to have a press card. So only people that have official licenses or press cards are allowed to report in Morocco. If you don't, you can be charged with an offense for acting like a journalist when you're not officially registered. So this makes sure that there's no actual independent press. And again, people that embrace self-determination for Western Sahara are particularly singled out. So here was one of the last independent journalists. This is from 2019. It says Morocco jailed journalists stuck in abusive solitary. And this gentleman was accused. They say he's falsely accused of sexual assault. But in any event, he's kept in solitary confinement. He was one of the country's last opposition newspapers, which is now closed. And again, this is considered a form of torture and abuse. So yet again, Morocco's concerning domestic policies from the Arab Center, again, criticizing many of these things. This is Reporters Without Borders, we already talked about, documenting these great abuses. And indeed, in 2022, the Department of State issued a human rights report detailing the atrocious human rights record. And so we see again, in 2020, Trump administration supposedly recognized this. And the Biden administration has done the same. The Biden administration Secretary of State, Anthony Democracy Blinken, has supported Moroccan occupation of the country with the Trump administration. Again, the Trump administration started it. The Biden administration has to be even more clearly committed to this one-sided position. Why? That's a mystery. Why would they support this? So here's the United States Department of State report on various abuses, including religious liberty. So no freedom of speech, no freedom of the press. What about freedom of religion? Well, it doesn't exist in Morocco and in occupied territories. Again, the law prohibits criticism of Islam or undermining the Islamic religion. The government restricts the distribution of non-Islamic religious materials and even of Sunnis, of any form other than Sunni Islam. Only one form of Islam is even permitted. Again, we saw this talk before. People can be put in jail for insulting Islam. Here again, there is a person that was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment for a gentleman who simply tried to convert his own family, his own children, to not even to Christianity, to a Shiite form of Islam. So again, some of these problems, again, punishment, it could be up to 5 years imprisonment for simply insulting Islam. You can't try and convert anyone, that's a crime. Trying to convert someone is a crime punishable by 6 months to 3 years. And remarkably, the penal code even enforces the Muslim fast of Ramadan. So this is what we mean by an authoritarian, if not totalitarian society. They're even regulating your diet. And then again, penalty for undermining Islam by electronic means. So you can't even post things to Facebook or to social media. The law does not allow Christian Muslims to be buried in Christian cemeteries or to hold Christian names. I mean, this is an authoritarian state. By law, all domestic schools, whether publicly or privately funded, must teach Sunni Islam. Now, foreign schools apparently are allowed an exception, but every native school must teach Sunni Islam. Again, this is a very authoritarian state. Mentioned before, this gentleman was arrested and fined for trying to catechize his own children. So certainly no parental rights in Morocco. And again, another thing, a Christian non-governmental organization has been complaining that they have no freedom to even talk about And we see yet again that The government controls the content of schools. They want to make sure there's no what they call extremist rhetoric, and schools must teach approved doctrine. So the government restricts the distribution of any kind of non-religious materials, including books, videotapes, DVDs, or anything they consider inappropriate. Now, obviously, we're going to see a major decline of Christianity. Christianity has all but been extirpated in Morocco and Moroccan occupied areas. Today, it's estimated there are only about some 25,000 Christians, mostly Catholics. Again, we know that 30, 40 years ago, when Morocco gained its independence, there were hundreds of thousands of Christians in Morocco. Again, in French Morocco, according to this, there were 360,000 Catholics, and today there are merely 25,000, a decrease of over 95%. And we see in Spanish Morocco, it's even worse. Again, there are about 25,000 Catholics, perhaps 3,000 to 10,000 Protestants. Again, nobody quite knows because they have to basically practice in secret. Western Sahara, again, it's even worse. Remember, there was a 60,000 population at independence. 20,000, about a third of the population, was Christian. Today, it's estimated there are 260 Christians left in Spanish Sahara. From 20,000 to 260. Again, Christianity has been wiped out in Morocco. This is a country that the current administration and the past administration has been supporting. Again, Human Rights Watch criticizing some of the practices of Morocco. In Morocco, any sex outside of wedlock is a crime. Same-sex sex is a crime. Adultery is a crime. But even fornication crime is a crime. Sex between two unmarried persons is a crime. Indeed, we see here just in 1 year, almost 8,000 adults were prosecuted just for sex, for non-transaction. That is not talking about any sort of prostitution, just for sex between adults. And obviously, you know, people criticize Russia and countries about their practice towards certain people, but this is far more extreme. This is, I don't know of any other country in the world, certainly a non-Muslim country, that crime for two unmarried persons to have sex. So again, it's a very authoritarian country, and yet no one ever seems to want to criticize this. They criticize certainly other countries for much worse, or for much less activity. So what are the West doing now? Well, the West is selling weapons. Here we have a story about Israeli weapons being used to kill civilians in Western Sahara. Again, remember, we have a small slice of Western Sahara, only about 20%. Allegations the Moroccan Air Force was buying these American drones and other Israeli weapons, and they've been using these things to kill civilians in this tiny little slice of Western Sahara. So again, according to this story, since 2021, 170 civilians have been hit, including 80 killed, including children. So again, this is a very sparsely populated area, but it appears that Morocco is even trying to chase people out of this little slice. So again, according to this article, a policy of ethnic cleansing is taking hold, according to the president of the Association of Sahrawi Prisoners. Again, that 20%, only a few nomads still exist. It's very hard to live there, but even they have been forced to abandon and join the refugee camps, completing the ethnic cleansing of the country. And again, this is from the United States government telling us how wonderful they like to sell weapons or give weapons to Morocco. We see here HIMARS, bombs, F-16s, Apache helicopters, 6,000 bombs. Who are they going to use those bombs on? 222 tanks, 600 personnel carriers. Now, you might say, well, at least the United States is getting some money, but actually it turns out that Morocco is getting many of these weapons subsidized or actually getting aid. So again, Morocco is investing heavily in long-range fires. Why would that be? Why would they need long-range fires? But look at this Moroccan aid. about $1.5 billion a year in Moroccan aid, mostly from the United States government. And of course, they use this aid to turn around and buy weapons, which they turn around and use to have their war against the Sahrawi people. And we see this again, the European Union, despite the European Court of Justice saying that the occupation is illegal, Ursula von der Leyen seems to say in this article, well, we don't really care what the court says, we're going to keep supporting Morocco. And again, the concern is that there is going to be another push to try and remove the Sahrawi people from the little slice of land they have. But the reality is, given the ethnic cleansing that's already taken place, the hundreds of thousands of Moroccans who have displaced the native population, getting their country back is going to be almost impossible. What are we going to do in another 10 or 20 years when that ethnic population has all grown up in the camps? They've never even been to their country. And again, the Moroccans are able to say, well, we've lived here for decades now. So unless something changes very soon, it's going to be almost impossible task for the Sahrawi to ever get their country back. Now, that, of course, is bad enough, but there's evidence that Morocco will not stop at the borders of Western Sahara. Indeed, we see this again. Joe Biden, State of the Union address. If anybody thinks Putin will stop at Ukraine, I assure you he will not. Now, he didn't tell us why, but you have to take his word for it. Or Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Austin, again, telling us, ladies and gentlemen, let's not kid ourselves. Putin will not stop at Ukraine, as President Biden has said. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of Britain, victorious Putin will not stop at Ukraine. Current Prime Minister of Britain, Keir Starmer, has assured us Putin will not stop at Ukraine if Putin wins there. And again, this was another defense minister telling us the same thing. Putin will not stop at Ukraine, according to these folks. And here's Liz Truss, yet another former Prime Minister of Britain, again telling us Putin will not stop at Ukraine. If he takes Ukraine, he will move on into the rest of Europe. So a few days ago, as I'm making this recording on the 24th of February, Gordon Chang, a very well-known neoconservative, made a comment I want to play for you. And he was on a show called Sid and Friends, WABC, and he made a comment that if the Russians take over Ukraine, in fact, they will take over the entire continent of Europe, all of Western Europe. So let me play that.
But right now, we've got to make sure that Russia doesn't go after Ukraine, because they're not going to stop there, Sid. They're going to go after all the other countries in Western Europe and in the Baltics.
Well, no, they're not.
So according to Gordon Chang, noted neocon authority, the Russians are not going to stop at Ukraine. They're going to go in all the countries of Western Europe and then the Baltics, France, Spain, Portugal. Now, again, I'm not here to debate whether that is a good or bad idea. You can decide for yourself if you think that is. But I do want to suggest there's far more evidence that the government of Morocco is going to go after other countries than there has that the Russians are going to go after other countries. Again, remember the Almoravid Empire. Mauritania, Algeria, Western Sahara, Spain. We've already seen Algeria has made territorial claims, not just on Western Sahara, but on Mauritania, on Algeria, and even on Spain. Now, Spain has fought a series of wars against Algeria. Ceuta has been a part of Spain since the 18th century, as has Melilla. So Ceuta and Melilla are cities, Spanish cities on the coast of North Africa. And here you see where they are, Ceuta and Melilla. And recently, Morocco reasserted, as they have been repeatedly doing, their claim that these are Moroccan cities, not Spanish cities. So again, from 2023, there was a dust-up between Spain and Morocco because Morocco, once again, claimed that Ceuta and Melilla are Moroccan cities and told the world they're going to take them back at some point. Now, Spain, according to this article, Spain went to appease Morocco and, in fact, asking them to calm down. They undid 50 years of formal Spanish neutrality and purported to recognize the sovereignty of Morocco over Western Sahara. Now, you want to talk about it, Willis Trust telling us that it's 1938 all over again. We're appeasing dictators. Well, here you've got a clear appeasing a dictator, right? It's 1938 all over again, says The Guardian. Britain. Now, again, I want to suggest to you, it's far more likely that Morocco will invade Spain than Russia will invade Spain. Maybe Portugal. Morocco was already threatened to invade Spain. So again, whatever you think of this idea that Russia will not stop in Ukraine, there's far more evidence for that of Morocco. So why don't we oppose Morocco? Now, yes, again, Gordon Chang that I mentioned before, he said also on that same interview, China is watching Ukraine. If Russians get away with taking Ukraine, China will be emboldened. Other dictators will be emboldened to invade other countries. Well, again, you can certainly say the exact same thing about Morocco. Why, if Morocco gets away with invading other countries like Western Sahara, it will embolden other dictators. In fact, maybe that's what emboldened the Russians. Maybe they saw Morocco get away with it. So again, if you're going to make an argument for you, certainly can make the same argument for Morocco and Western Sahara. So again, it's a very concerning situation. There is evidence that, again, Moroccans are bulking up. They're bulking up their military. They may be ready to launch another offensive to wipe out the rest of the country. But even without that, the occupation of most of the country and the ethnic cleansing and the replacement of the ethnic Sahrawi with Moroccans is really spelling to the Sahrawi Republic. And the Americans support it. I can't tell you why. Frankly, it makes no sense whatsoever. The Americans during the Cold War supported Morocco because the Algerians seemed to be cozy with the communists, but those days are, of course, long over. Why in the world Americans would be giving weapons to Morocco to extirpate Christianity and throw out the native Sahrawis and potentially even go further is a mystery beyond belief. Anyway, thank you for listening.